She worked for the post office for about 100 years? 39. Well, 39, that's close. And then retired and somehow found her way to Spiritual Life Center, which we'll hear about when she gets up here. And she works as my assistant. She does all of our beautiful altars. She shops for supplies, so anything that's in the kitchen, she's probably bought at Costco for you. What else do you do? Oh, and she does all the hospitality stuff. So she's, in retirement, she's about as retired as, I don't know. So I would just like to welcome to the platform Patty Peters. And I asked Patty to give me a bio, and she went, I worked for the post office. I don't know how to do a bio. So welcome, Patty.
Thank you for having me, Deborah.
So before we get into these stories, so we had this conversation, and yes, I've been very glib about explaining it. That was to get people interested. And so you started off telling the story about how you were babysitting and you were, watching. So the first question is how old were you when this happened, and did you have a spiritual connection at that point in your life?
Well, I've always believed in God, but I don't know that you would say I necessarily had a spiritual connection or relationship. I prayed to God, but it was more the God where if you get me out of this, I won't do that again kind of thing, because I once I got sober, which wasn't for like 6 years later, then I had a connection. But at this point, no.
Were you in your addiction at this point in your life?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things I forgot to mention in her introduction is Patty is a student of Unity, but she's also a student of Science of Mind and has just finished your second or third year.
My second year.
Your second year. You got your certificate, right?
Yeah, it's in the mail. I was just told by Reverend Georgia. It's in the mail. I hope to get it any day.
Okay. So you what happened with this first incident? Let's take each incident, but what happened with the first one?
Okay, well, what happened and how the story came up was on the night that Marcia McCrimmons was here, and she was speaking about her relationship and connection with babies. And so after the service, I was talking to Reverend Deborah about this connection I had with this baby, and that's how the story started. At the time, it was, I think, 1979. I had two young children, 2 and 3 years old, and at the kind of level of job I had at the time, it didn't pay well, and so not enough to cover the cost of a babysitter, really. So I decided I would go into child care, and this woman that my then husband, Bruce, worked with, she had just had a baby and was going to go back to work in 3 months. And I think that setting this stage is kind of important to the story. And so she interviewed me and decided in 3 months' time that I would watch her son named Paul. And so this had been set up for a long time, and Paul came to my house this morning. And he came to my house on a Friday because then she wanted the weekend to kind of be with him and stuff. And so, as with my own children, when he was there, he was taking a nap, and I kept going in to watch, make sure I could see the rise and fall of his back. And every time you do that, you expect to see the rise and fall of their baby's back. And every time I did until this one time. And I thought that maybe, I was mistaken. And so I picked him up, and he went limp in my arms, and his eyes rolled back in his head. And I immediately called 911, but also the girl across the street from me happened to be someone I went to high school with, and she had become an RN. So here I had my kids, which were, like I said, 2 and 3, and 2 other children and this baby, and I run across the street thinking that she could help save the baby. Well, as I'm running across the street with him, he projectile vomits, and obviously then he's obviously alive. But I had this moment with him where I'm looking in his eyes, and it was surreal and spiritual, and I obviously felt the presence of God at that time. So what ended up happening is the ambulance got there, and I called the parent, and that was the thing that I will not forget. I only had one of the parents' phone numbers because you think I had some information, but we weren't as good as we should have been. So I went in the ambulance with the baby, and of course my fear was that since this was the first time I'd had their baby, and he'd only been in my care like 4 hours, that they were just gonna kill me. So got to the hospital, and the parents got there, and actually it was quite the opposite, because the mom told me that if the baby was home with her, that she would just leave him crying in the crib or sleeping, and she didn't know. She would never go check on him. So they believed that I saved the baby's life. And so obviously, if I hadn't gone in the bedroom, things would have been different. And I don't even want to comprehend that, because when you're in a situation like that, when it's somebody else's child, it was, I can't even describe the terror. I can't even describe it. So that's what happened.
So after it happened, did you think about God? Did you think about, what did you, because I'm going to tell you is that one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is as you were telling me these things, it kind of sounded like at the time you were just like, oh, okay. But, so what was it like then? And now that we're talking about it, is there a difference in how you're seeing it?
Well, yes, there is. Now, this is the one where I definitely was grateful to God, because if I would have gone in there just a few minutes later, I can't comprehend. I don't want to comprehend that. So I'm very grateful that I was obsessive compulsive about it. And I was pregnant with my youngest son at the time, so I had extra, I don't know what going on. Awareness going on, yes, since I was carrying and going to have another baby. So yes, I was definitely grateful to God, and I definitely think that it was a God moment. I've never doubted that for a moment.
Okay, let's move on to the second incident, and then we'll put this all together. So then what happened?
So then 2 days later on a Sunday, my former husband, Bruce, we're on great terms. We get along great. So Bruce and I we wanted to go water skiing. His parents had a boat, which we had.
Were you still married at the time?
Yes,
okay.
yes. So we were going to go boating, use his parents' boat, and which we had the great fortune anytime we wanted. And it was a trip where we invited one of my neighbors along who had never been skiing before in a boat. And so I share that for a reason. So if anybody's not familiar with water skiing, I'll tell you that you have to have the driver of the boat, obviously, and then a water skier, and then a spotter. And that spotter obviously looks to see if, the water skier is still up or had fallen down or whatever, and you need to go back and retrieve them. Well, we went to this place called Rollins Lake, which is very long and narrow. And against our better judgment, I know now, I was going to drive the boat, which I never felt comfortable doing, especially with a skier. And Bruce was the water skier. And then I think her name was Debbie, was the spotter. And we told Debbie to let us know if Bruce had fallen or anything like that. And I really now don't think she really grasped the enormity of what we were asking. Because when I went to turn the boat around, all of a sudden, Debbie says to me, I think he fell down. And what happened was, I think he'd been down for a little bit, but she didn't say anything because she wasn't really paying attention, which you have to pay attention, obviously. And so what happened when I turned the boat around, and I didn't know all this at the time, that she really wasn't paying attention, and I don't know how long he'd been down and all that. And when we pulled the boat up, he was lying like that in the water. And so, of course, I stopped the boat, immediately jumped out and lifted him up, but he was literally dead weight. I mean, trying to get his head up was very difficult, but I did. And the lake wasn't very populated because it was narrow, like I said, so not a lot of boats are going. It's not like Folsom where there's a bunch of boats all over. And so we're screaming, help, help. And because the two of us couldn't get him on the hull, is that the front? The hull of the boat. So these people came and they helped us get him up and to get his airways clear and have him, just like the baby, I guess. He, spewed out water. But in those days, in 1979, you may remember, there were no cell phones. There were no cell phones. So I don't even know how we got the boat to the dock, and somebody had to call somebody to, find a pay phone to have the ambulance come, which was a long, long wait. And once Bruce finally regained consciousness, then he started talking gibberish, not gibberish, but he talked about people that weren't there with us today. It was obvious that something wasn't right, and he had some head trauma. Well, what we later found out was what he had hit, was he was so close to the shore, was some huge rocks underneath the water. And that's when I found out from my friend Debbie that she didn't know she was supposed to really be watching him the whole time, and who knows how long he was lying there like that. So I went in the ambulance with him, of course, and he had a severe concussion, but he was totally okay once, several days passed or a week or so when he got over the concussion. Then he was okay, but we never took her water skiing again. That's so wrong. That's so wrong.
Okay, and so of course, it's only 2 days later, so you're still pregnant and you're still lifting your husband out of the water. Keep this in mind. Okay, so what was the third incident?
Okay, so the following Sunday, because we're glutton for punishment, we decided we'd go water skiing again.
Without Debbie.
Without Debbie. Yes, without Debbie. She was fine, but not as a spotter. Like I said, my sons were 3 and about 2, and I actually think Dustin was about 18 months. And at that time, we didn't take a grill with us. We just took charcoal and dug, a hole in the sand, and then they did the barbecue that way. And so I was walking along the beach and with my son, and just out of the corner of my eye, I see simultaneously the coals and him falling at the same time. And I mean, it could have been really bad because, young skin is very tender. And I grabbed him, and he did get his leg right here, 3rd-degree burns, but in a very small area. Had he fallen in that, I don't know what could have happened. but luckily he didn't. Just that, because I just saw him, and
And all of the mom instincts were just there.
all the mom instincts were definitely just there. Yes, yes. So that was the third incident.
So at the end of that week, did you contemplate any of this back then?
Well, I definitely contemplated the presence of God. I don't know how I could not know that there was a God, because all three of those incidents they all could have had a very different turn. And so I was extremely grateful. And, I prayed to God that I was grateful. It was one of the, I'm embarrassed to say, it's one of the times that I was grateful to God, instead of praying to the Santa Claus God, oh, do this, do that, I'll never do this again if you do that. And that's, I hate to admit, but that's kind of how I prayed a lot of the time. But that week I was just expressing gratitude, and it felt really good.
Did you kind of worry about the next couple of days, what was going to happen next? Or did you go, okay, it's happened 3 times, it's done?
I said exactly that. Yeah. It's happened 3 times. I'm done. But there was that lingering, nagging thing that maybe things don't always happen in 3s. But I'll tell you this, we didn't go water skiing for a while, or to the lake in the boat. I just couldn't do it for a while. It was traumatic. It was a very traumatic week.
Okay, so now, how many years ago was this?
It was in 1979.
Okay, we won't make a number out of that. We'll just go 1979. That's too far back. Okay, so now, and when we talked about it, you were just kind of telling the story, and I think you saw the look on my face, and you're like, wait a minute, there might be something. So now that what's been 2 weeks since we had that conversation? Yeah, so what's been going on in your head about this since then?
Well, I just, I guess in a way I'm surprised at myself for not, at that time, pursuing a spiritual path. But my life was pretty full back then, working full time. I worked up until the day I had each baby, and then went to work 5 weeks later. And so there wasn't a lot of extra time, although there should always be time made for God. But I didn't pursue going to a church or anything like that. But, and I can't say that I prayed to God all the time, my gratitude, because it was just, I don't know.
It was something that happened and you got through it and you said, thank you, God, and went on. And, we have this conversation with young people all the time, is that one of the reasons congregations like this tend to have older people is because we're the ones who have time for it. When you have jobs and children and all of that, you make choices of what you spend your time on. So I think that this leads us to a conversation about, divine intervention. One of the things that went through my head was that little baby inside you going, hey, Mom, look what's going on, trying to get your attention. We could do this for quite some time. You could play with it now, but even though, and I think this also says that even though you don't necessarily have a full-blown spiritual life, you still hear God.
Well, absolutely. And I think before this happened, if I would have a thought about something, like the first one with Paul before it happened with the baby, I just think, I had a thought. And now I know that it was God talking to me, but at the time I didn't really see that. I thought, I had this thought, and it turned out to be fortuitous, whatever it was, something, a good idea or something like that I felt was just me. But I never really believed that it was just me.
So I'm going to ask a real, what's the word? a splitting hairs question is, what's the difference between you having a thought and just having a feeling? Just a feeling I need to go look at the baby, a feeling I need to, is there a difference for you?
Yes, there is. A feeling is like a knowing, and for me, a feeling is like you better do it. A feeling to me is like you better do it. It's not better, but it's a smart idea to take action on that feeling.
Or maybe almost a little compulsion to go check that baby?
Yes, yes. Because it was, and I was obsessive compulsive about it that day. I can't even describe it, you know.
Were you normally that vigilant?
No, not at all. So
even in the middle of being young, busy, and in addiction, you on some level you were still listening and still able to hear divine messages.
Well, yes, and let me just backtrack and say, when I was pregnant, I need to say this. When I was pregnant, I wasn't active in my addiction. All my kids came out healthy and normal and all that. So it was more after the third child that it got, bad for just a few years, because then I got sober in '85. So.
But still, at that point, I mean, but yeah, and of course, your mind is. I've not had children, but I know that pregnancy brain kicks in, but also that hyper awareness, that sensitivity that comes with, because all three of these in 1 week. Oh my goodness. So, do you believe in, I'm not going to say predestination, but you were just in the right place at the right time for these people?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And the parents of the baby, of course, and like I said, I couldn't have believed their stance, because I was so nervous about seeing them. They wanted me to watch their son, of course, because they felt that, I'd saved him, where would have maybe had a different outcome if he was home. And I watched him. I said, I can't do it. I just couldn't do it. I'd never let the baby out of my sight if I did that.
So you never watched the baby again, is that what you're saying?
Yes, I never did. And I got the call for the post office very shortly thereafter, and got out of childcare, which was, I think, a good thing. You know what I mean?
Well, perhaps a little stressful, and the benefits are probably better.
Yes.
So when you think about, okay, so now, all these years later, and now you're doing deep spiritual studies, where are you with, excuse me, the inner voice? And I think that's what this conversation is really about. I call it the IV, my inner voice. Yeah, see? Your IV. Are you more aware of that now? Do you use it more? Do you respond to it more?
Absolutely. And this is going to be, it's a non-spiritual thing that happened, but if I would have paid attention, I was putting stuff in my washing machine, and something told me to stay there while it washed, but I did not. I went in the other room, and my whole washing machine flooded and overflowed, and to the tune of having new carpet, and it did a lot of damage. It did a whole lot of damage. And had I listened, that wouldn't have happened. And that was nothing like saving a life or helping somebody or anything like that. But, it was a big deal at the time. It was a big deal having to deal with all that. So now I pay attention. I don't dismiss. Even if it's, now I'm such a believer, I don't dismiss even the most minute inkling of a feeling, Yeah,
I think that happens to all of us. In the house that my husband and I used to live in, we had a little hot tub in our sunroom for a while, and we had emptied it one day, and then we put the hose in it to fill it back up, and I stood there and I got a picture in my head of it overflowing. And I turned around and walked in the other room. And we both went in the other room and watched TV for a little bit. And I said, oh, I think we should check it, and went out, and it was overflowing. And my husband said it filled up faster than he expected to. Fortunately, it was a tile floor, and but I got an absolute image of it overflowing, and I walked away from it. And fortunately, it was not, And I thought, wow, I've gotten pretty sloppy here, But I think we talk ourselves out of it. Why do we talk ourselves out of it? What is that?
I don't know why that is, because it made no sense for me to walk away in this instance with the washer. For just a few minutes, I could stand there and make sure everything was okay. I don't know the answer to that, because we think, oh, it's nothing. It's not real, my intuition. We discount it.
Is it because we can't see it, we can't prove it? Why do we discount it? I think that's part of it. I think it's hard to prove. It's hard to, And also, of course, it's like, why would I stand here in front of the washing machine?
Well, it seemed silly at the time. It seemed silly.
Probably because we have the next thing in our head that we have to do this, this, and this. So that's like overshadowing the feeling, because, oops, I got to put the dishes in here, and I got to do this and that, and then it's gone.
Okay.
You're
Yeah.
overriding the.
Andrew, I forgot to ask for a third microphone. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to say that again once he gets it, so that.
What did I say? No.
Oh, I can kind of remember. So. Oh, okay, yeah. It's just that the people online can't really, in the video can't really hear it. And, but yeah, I think this is a good conversation to bring you all into, because it's like. But other times when I've noticed for me that when it's times that have to do with people, with something that could be happening to someone, I do pay more attention than I do with a washing machine or a hot tub or a, whatever, or animals. It's like I'm going to be extra careful, but we still sometimes just kind of, and part of it, of course, we live in such a distracting world now. I wonder, Patty, and this is a terrible thing to speculate, but if this had been in the cell phone age, I wonder if you had been so diligent with that baby.
Oh,
I'm just saying that.
that's a great question. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, that's a great question, because I have found that I'm going to have to start backing away from the cell phone. It's ridiculous. But you're exactly right. Of course, I did have all the other kids there, so I don't think that I'd be on my phone at that time. I hope not.
Okay, I'm going to ask Lynn to repeat what she said, and the question is, why do we just kind of breeze by it sometimes? That was a great answer, so I'd like people to be able to hear it.
Is this working? Yes. Okay, I think because we have so many thoughts. We have so many thoughts in our mind that it overrides the feeling, because, oops, I have to put the dishes in the dishwasher, and I have to, I have to make a list for tomorrow, and I have to get something baked for the bake sale. And all those thoughts just override that feeling that you have to do something different.
And also, I think we're taught to ignore some of our feelings. How many people as children will say, well, that's silly. You're imagining that. Yeah, you're just imagining blah, blah, blah. And so there's that we have to relearn. Any other comments? Okay. Do you mind being our runner? Thank you.
I think
It's work.
sometimes we just don't want to listen to it because maybe we're tired and we have it in our mind, I need to sit down. Or we have something else we want to do. Okay, I've been trying to get over there to turn on my favorite program for all day. I don't want to deal with this now. I want to go over and do something else. And that's another reason we dismiss the little voice. But I've learned through the years, when you get the idea, it's just like a soft idea. Maybe maybe I should do this thing, but it's a soft voice. That's the right one. And then the ego over mind gets in there. Oh, nah, don't worry about that. We got lots of other fun stuff to do, and we talk ourselves out of it.
I like that, the soft voice. Thank you. That's a really good term, isn't it?
It's a great term. I like it.
And sometimes it would be nice if it were not so soft because it would get our attention. But have you ever had a moment where it just wouldn't leave you, where there was something that was so insistent? On some level, that was what was happening for you the day with the baby, is that you just felt compelled to keep looking in and checking on him.
I never looked at it that way, but you're absolutely right. Using the word compelled is very accurate.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you said for yourself, when it comes to people, if I get a thought, a feeling to call somebody or check on not check on them, but just call a friend, I will act on that, because a lot of times they may need somebody to reach out or something like that. I have a friend, I was talking about this morning, who she had quit working at my post office and went to a different post office, and so we didn't remain as much in touch. Our lives kind of took different, she had her thing, I had mine, but then we reached out and we were going to meet for lunch, and she canceled on me. And I kept thinking that I would reach out to her again, and then I never did. And I don't really know if I want to say it. She ended up shortly thereafter taking her own life. And I wonder, I'm just one person, but regardless of if it would have changed anything, I would at least maybe gotten to see where she was at and talk with her. So that is a regret I have, that I just didn't follow through.
And I'm guessing you're not the first person who's ever not followed through. And it's the forgiving yourself for not listening to intuition, no matter what it is. I think with the baby, that would have been really hard for you to live with, even harder.
Yeah.
But I can think of a lot of times where I didn't listen. Fortunately, none of it had to do with someone, taking their own life or anything. But we have to, I try to balance it with, okay, I get a lot of intuition. That's part of how I function the way I do as a minister, is I run 90% on intuition. I really do. And if I ran 100% on intuition, I wouldn't be able to function in this world. I wouldn't be able to get up in the morning or keep a schedule or, And so where's that balance between listening and just doing what you need to do, and then what is our job? I mean, I guess it's simple in one way, but it's complicated in another. And one of the things that we tend to do when we get on a spiritual path is, put ourselves on this thing. I'm spiritual now. I have to be good. I can't make mistakes. And I don't think that's true. Do you, Patty?
No, and at the time I was new to SLC and hadn't really been in, hadn't really gotten to the point where I am now, where, I have the trusting or of the feeling and stuff like that. And I know I'm not responsible for anybody but myself. But, we all like to think that we could, make a change in somebody's life, I realize I'm not responsible.
But you just used a really important word, and that's trusting. Trusting the IV, trusting the soft voice, trusting the voice. How many people are trying to learn how to? I mean, how many people just trust the voice now? And how many people are still working on it? Yeah.
Both.
Yeah, and it's both for me too, because for me, running on intuition so much, I think, well, Deborah, you're just getting arrogant now. And so that's how I argue myself out of it. It was like, you just think you know everything. When in particular that case, I probably actually did. But it's like trying to keep a balance. Anybody have any thoughts on this? Surely you're having thoughts on this. Okay, no questions. All right.
There's somebody.
Oh, okay. Connie's coming with the microphone there.
Well, someone just reminded me that
It's okay. Go ahead.
when we're children, now things I think are getting better, but even young children that for some reason, the parents go, no, that's our neighbor. He's okay. He wants you to sit on his lap or whatever, and you don't want to, But so it's because you have a knowing. You're very connected to source still. And even playing with images or, you have friends that nobody else can see. You're talked out of it when you're a child. You're not, you're told, no, this is whatever. So it's, that it's in your head or it's not a good idea or whatever. For myself, we were always taught that an idle mind is the devil's workshop, Also, idle hands. You needed to be very busy producing all the time, something that was meaningful. So I think that a lot of it is because it's part of our upbringing, let alone the ego then says, oh, no, I know better or whatever. So I think that's a big part of it.
I agree with you, and I would say that in some respects, maybe some people are more aware of the letting the weird relative, do the thing. But I hear Lynn has something, but I know the parents still say that's silly, that's not real, you're making it up. I was in a store. I think I may have said this in another Wednesday, but I was in a store. It was Old Navy, and this couple came in with this. He was maybe 3. He was walking pretty well, but he was still working on it. And he tripped and he hit his head, and I heard his head hit the concrete. And he started to cry. And his dad came and picked him up and said, don't you cry, little boys. Men don't cry. And just walked. I could hear him all the way around the corners. He was chastising this kid. And I had to leave the store because I think going and, smacking the man was probably going to get me in trouble. But, it took everything I had not to say something to him. It was just horrendous. And so that is still very much out there. So we are taught. But, the parents saying that's not real, and then we start saying, well, it's real to me, but if it's not real to the rest of the world, then it must not be okay. Lynn, you had something.
Yeah, talking about the feeling and not acting on it, it brought me back to when I was a public health nurse and I was very involved. I kind of got personally involved too with a Romanian family. They had like 13 children and they were struggling. And I had spent a lot of time there. We had different tools to use to see about how the baby was bonding and everything. And it just seemed like everything was like perfect. Well, anyway, the mother was struggling, so I told her that, she could clean my house for me if she wanted. So the first day, she doesn't show up. I don't hear anything. I can't get a hold of her. Well, it turns out that her and the oldest son, they were arguing in the car, and right by their house at the intersection, they were hit. There was one of the children were in there, the older girl, the mother, and the son. And the mother had to be helicoptered out. And she was in a coma, and she was out of the home for quite some time. The girl, who was like about maybe 13 or 14, she had some trauma and had to have follow-up, with her teeth and had a concussion. Well, first of all, I kept thinking, well, if I never offered this to her, this never would have happened. I kind of felt responsible for it, although I know that I wasn't. But then the girl started writing. I don't think I was the public health nurse anymore because I wouldn't have had her doing something personal in my home. I closed the case. And so then the girl was writing me letters, and I can't really remember specifically what the letters were about, but it turns out she was really reaching out to me. The father was molesting her. And apparently she did reach out. Somebody helped her, and then she was removed from the home. But I just didn't act on that. I don't know what else was going on in my life at that time. We had adopted a baby, and I was still working full time, but I always regretted the fact that I didn't follow up with, connecting with her when this was happening.
And I think the question is, how do we know? I mean, and especially in the work that you were doing, so many of those kinds of things would come by you. It's a really interesting thing that happens. It's like, what do we pay attention to? What are we supposed to pay attention to? And because if you're paying attention to that little voice 24/7, you're not living in the world. And right?
That's absolutely right. And I was thinking of something else. Because I have felt like I didn't really have that much of an intuition or a knowing or a feeling, I meditate to try to just get that closeness and that oneness and, to kind of enhance that. And it is very helpful. And I lost my next thought.
I just want to also say that, and I thought that, I didn't think they did corporal punishment or anything like that. Then I find out that even the little kids, if they did something wrong, they made them kneel on like nails, boards with nails. And, I was pretty good at picking up a lot of things and being aware of my surroundings and everything. But that just really shocked me. Even the other nurse, when we went together to do all these different testing to see, with the baby and the bonding and all of that, we never picked anything up like that. So.
And so there are people who say, well, God just didn't want you to know that one, and it wasn't your job. And I don't believe that. And those people were just really good at hiding it. And I was very defiant as a young person. I'm sure that would probably surprise most of you. But I wasn't into metaphysics per se at the time. I hadn't found unity, but I was like 22 or 23, and I had some friends who were fundamental Christians, and we were good friends, and I respected them, but they were like, this didn't happen, so Jesus didn't want me to do this today. And so one day my sink was stopped up, and I used a little coat hanger to try to unclog it, and it went right through the pipe, put a hole in the pipe. It wasn't the greatest department, okay? So I sat there, and of course they were going to call the plumber, and I looked at all of those dishes, and I could hear them saying, well, Jesus didn't want you to do the dishes today. So I picked up all of my dishes, and I took them into the bathroom, and I washed them in the bathtub just to prove that Jesus did not care when I washed my dishes. So I think we can go too far in that what we're supposed to do thing, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right.
And it's like if the intuition is there partly to protect us, right? Because our primary thing in this world is to survive. And there was a point, where, we live RJ has something. Can you take him? But we're at a point where we don't have to worry about walking out of the house and having the animals come get us and stuff. But that survival instinct is still very much with us, and that's a lot of what intuition is. RJ.
Yeah, I think there is a danger in this external God, because, what I know about New Thought is that God is within me. God created me, so I have that God consciousness within me. So if I start to think, like, for instance, if I'm on a call with someone with a cell phone and the call drops, and then I go, oh, well, I guess Jesus didn't want me to be on that call, So then anything that happens in the exterior world, we can just, like, give permission for the fact that that was God's will? I think not. If I really want to make that call and keep on the call, I'm going to dial back and say, oh, and then she might have said, oh, yeah, I was driving by the cell tower, and then I went up a hill, and then I went down a hill. And it wasn't because of Jesus not wanting me to talk. And then we talked again for another half an hour. So, I think we really have to be very careful that anything that happens in the exterior world, like you said, is not God's will. I want to pivot to a second thought, which I think is really important, and that is, in all three of your scenarios, you were the person who jumped into action. But I think it's also important that since we all share a consciousness, if we are the beloved children of God, so each one of those people that you helped also had I think they had some subconscious vibe that was part of what they wanted. Because I've been around people where I really get the strong feeling that they don't want the help. And on some subconscious level, I might be led not to go into a bedroom and do that. Or I may not be led to, I know a man who committed suicide, and I was pondering whether or not to contact him that night. And I got a very strong impression not to. Found out in the morning he had taken his life. And I had followed my inner wisdom not to intervene, and I never beat myself up before it. So I usually have to just check in, and for me, I think it is, a co-creation. Like that baby subconsciously might have said, hey, I really want to survive, and I want someone to rescue me. I want someone to be there for me. And that might have been the energy that drew you in. That's a possibility.
Or if we wanted to go really seriously woo-woo, we could say that the baby she was carrying was talking to the baby in the crib, and they were working together to get her to come. I mean, all of those energies. And yes, we can get very, very woo-woo. But there is, if we talk about there is only one energy, one power, one presence, then that communication is happening. And, and you can play with this forever, right? And we're not going to say any of this is right or wrong. It's just such an interesting thing. I think everybody in this room will agree that intuition is definitely a thing. The inner voice, the IV, is a thing. And, learning to listen to it, learning to use it, learning to appreciate it and respect it, I think is a lot of... But again, we get busy, we get tired, we get distracted, and we let things go. And that's all about being human, and I think that's why we're here, is to be human.
Well, that's true. And what you said earlier makes sense, too, as far as not, if you listen to every little thing that's going through your head, you can drive yourself crazy. But if something's nagging me, that's the thing to pay the most attention to, if it kind of won't let go,
Exactly. Paul?
I know I'm not the only one, but wait till you hear it. There's that big piece of chocolate cake sitting there, and that still small voice says, it's not a good idea to eat that. But I'm smarter than that small voice. I am. I deserve it. It's got those feel-good hormones once I eat it, the oxytocin, the serotonin, dopamine. I'm going to be filled with happiness. And besides, it's got magnesium. And dark chocolate has magnesium. So, God, I'm so smart. Then I eat this thing, and I pay for it because I didn't listen to that voice. And later, this voice is talking to me, and so is my stomach and everything else, talking to me and saying, how's that working out for you, smart boy? God has a sense of humor. So I don't believe I'm the only one, but I sometimes think I can outsmart that voice.
Well, I will have to, I really do believe that chocolate screams louder than God. It calls to us. It demands our attention. But no, we do. It's like, God, it tastes so good, and it's so, and I'm not sure if we just think that we're smarter or we just figure, what the heck. I had a friend who Oh, I guess she didn't drink very often, but when she did a pretty good job of it. And I told her once, I said, I don't see how you can do it, because any alcohol just makes me sick. I mean, that's why I don't. I mean, yeah. And I told her she was doing something, and I said, I would feel so horrible afterwards that it's not worth it to me. And she said, I feel so good while I'm doing it. It's worth feeling bad later. And I guess maybe for me, I didn't feel that good while I was doing it. And I'm not talking about chocolate, I'm talking about alcohol. It just feels so good to do it now that it's whatever the ramifications are, it's worth it. And I was always fascinated by that. But of course, alcohol makes me really sick, so, Hey, Patty, you're supposed to be the star tonight, and we're just all...
I just feel like I don't know what else to say. I don't know what else to say right this minute.
Okay, so does anybody else we've got a few more minutes. Okay. Wait, got to have a microphone.
Oh, gosh. In your recent experience, I guess maybe spanning a year and a half or so, if... Can you put it in front of your... It's there. How does religious science, those classes, fit with SLC and your growth spiritually?
Well, they're so similar that there's no conflict whatsoever. I think the main difference is just that religious science or science of mind has a 5-step prayer that they use, and I believe that's the main difference. But in all my teaching and the teachers that I've had in that, they say it doesn't have to be the 5-step. It doesn't have to be that. I mean, they talk about it a lot, and it is the formula, but it's not the be-all, end-all. Just saying, thank you, God, that's a prayer. So it's basically thoughts create your experience. And we talk about that in our five principles, thoughts create our experiences. And that's exactly what they teach. So that it's the same thing.
It's a different vocabulary. Yeah. And religious science or science of mind, they're a little more, not a little, they're a lot more structured in how they teach. And so that's kind of helpful. It's like when you're learning how to write, you need to learn grammar and punctuation and all of that, and then you can go back and break the rules, which means writing poetry, because that's where you're breaking all the rules. But the 5-step treatment is really to teach you how to get into the consciousness of doing the mental healing, the mental whatever. And so once you've got that, then you can develop your own way. So it's a little bit more structured. And I've seen a huge difference in you, Patty, by going and getting that structured training and then coming back into our more free-flowing, but they work together. Because my initial training was also, I was in a unity church, but I was trained in religious science as a minister. And so, but I'm also ordained in an independent church, so I'm not a unity minister, but all of my training is within these two. And I listen to what you say sometimes, and I'm trying, I got that from there. I got that from there because mine was so varied. And my spiritual mentor did that intentionally so that I wouldn't get stuck in one thing. And I'm so grateful to him still. But what it has done for you has just been amazing. The way you've changed in the last 4 years, or 3 years. No, 4 years, I guess, because you started a couple of years before pandemic thingy started, right?
In the science of mind?
Yeah.
Less than 2 years ago.
Oh, so you started during the...
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
The thing.
My
Okay.
initial not result. My initial training was on a Zoom class, but then I've taken many in-person classes as well. Yes.
So I think we have time for maybe one more question, if anybody has one. Okay, Patty, thank you. I know you're a little nervous tonight. Thank you for being willing to talk about that. I mean, that's really deep stuff you talked about tonight, and I really appreciate your being willing to come up here and talk about it. I thought it was such an interesting thing
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Okay, so next, that must be me. Next week, we have Betty Jo Splendorio. And I have to ask her if she married him so that those names would go together. Anyway, she is a nurse, and she had a career, a really good career as a nurse. And during the pandemic, she and her husband did, she said, the scariest thing they could think to do, which was start to have children. And so she had her first baby when she was like 40 or 42. And then they just recently had another baby, and they come on to the Sunday morning service. But it was like, what is it like to be that age in this day and time, to be that age, walk away from your career for a while? Because I think she works 1 or 2 days a month now. Walk away from your career at that age in this day and time and just become a full-time mother. And she says she has a lot to say about that. And I decided to call it From Dollars to Diapers. So Betty Jo will be with us next week, so join us for that. And now it is our opportunity to support Spiritual Life Center. And if you are online, you can text SLC Love to 44321 and give us a donation that way. You can, of course, go to our website, click on the donate button, or always mail in some sort of an offering. And so for those of us here, let us symbolically raise our offering and say our blessing together. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, and all that I circulate. Thank you, God.
Thank you, 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 thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Pouring down, your love is pouring down. Your love is pouring down. Your love is pouring down. Thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and make our circle, and we can do our prayer for protection.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, we have an almost real circle tonight. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you, Patty. And thank you all for sharing. And let's take a nice deep breath. Together. The light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever we are, God is.
She's not